Creating and calling constructors. My name's Caila Blanton. To set up, a constructor is a method that has the same name as the class. It has no return type. Below is an example of the class rectangle with a constructor and two instance fields. As you can see, there is no return type, not even void. Calling a constructor. A constructor is automatically called when an instance of the class is created. It performs initializations or setup operations. Below is an example of the class rectangle demo. In this case, we call the constructor from the class rectangle within the main method. We create a rectangle object, box1, and pass to it initial width and length values. A default constructor. It implicitly is provided in a program. It initializes numbers to 0 and Boolean values to false. It is not called if you create a custom constructor. Below we call the constructor for rectangle. We print out rect, which is our rectangle object, .getWidth, and rect.getLength. If we have no custom constructor for the class rectangle, the output of this statement will be 0, 0. Overloaded constructors. These occur when you create two constructors for a class that accept different parameter types. Below is an example of a class calling an overloaded constructor. We use the same class rectangle demo, which within the main method creates two rectangle objects, box1 and box2. Box1 has no values passed to it, which means that it's calling a constructor with no parameters. Box2 passes 5.0 and 10.0 to the constructor, which lets you know that the constructor takes two doubles. Overloaded constructors continued. This class shows how the constructors were defined. The constructor with no parameters initializes the length to 0 and the width to 0, whereas the constructor that takes two doubles initializes the length and width to the doubles provided. Default versus defined constructors. Once you define a constructor, you cannot use the default constructor. If you define the constructor for a class that has an int parameter, you cannot call the default noarg constructor. The example below, rectangle rect, is declared equal to new rectangle. There are no parameters passed to the rectangle constructor. This call will not work if a constructor that accepts an argument is already defined. Initialization. If an instance field is initialized when it is declared, but is set to another value in the constructor, the variable's final value will be the one set in the constructor. To the right, we have an example of the rectangle class, where the variables are created, the constructor is created, and then the variable values are changed. Initialization demo. We create the class rectangle demo. In it, we call the rectangle constructor with an object box1. The box1 has instance fields of length and width. These are set to 2 and 4 respectively, as defined by our initialization constructor on the previous slide. Data values in a constructor. We once again use the class rectangle. In this case, we've initialized the instance field length to 1, but the int area we have not initialized. Within the rectangle constructor, we set the length equal to 2. We also create a method called getLength, which returns the length. Data values in a constructor continued. To the left, we once again have the class rectangle. We initialize the same variables as before. However, this time we have a method setLength instead of a method getLength. Also, within the constructor, we call the method setLength and pass to it length, which was the integer passed to the constructor. And the method setLength, we determine the length based on the value of the integer in. Calling the set method within a constructor allows variables not to be confined to a specific value.